The Velvet Ledger. A Hood Eloquence original. Where the streets meet the literature. Power is not just about who is holding the keys to the city. It is about who knows exactly where to touch you to make you forget you ever had a door locked. Part 1. The Architecture of Appetite. Chapter 1. The Commission. Some jobs are not about the money. They are about the precision required to take everything from a man who thinks he cannot be touched. The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, the kind of hour that separated the amateurs from the architects. Simone Davis was still at her desk when the encrypted line rang, not the public number she gave to clients, not the cell phone she carried like armor, but the third line. The one whose existence she had never confirmed to anyone living. She let it ring twice. Composure was its own form of currency. "Davis," she said. Not a question. Never a question. The voice on the other end was familiar in the way that expensive cologne is familiar, something you recognize before you can name it, something that has a way of staying with you long after the source has gone. "Simone. Julian Ford requires your services." She leaned back in her leather chair. The city spread 40 stories below her like a circuit board of ambition, every light a decision someone had made that they could not unmake. She knew the name. Everyone who operated at her altitude knew the name. Julian Ford. 43. Self-made, which meant he had remade himself so many times he had lost track of the original. His empire Ford Tech, a sprawling network of data infrastructure and proprietary AI licensing, had recently been valued at a number that made other billionaires' mouths go dry. He had a penthouse in Manhattan, a villa in Tuscany, a private island whose name did not appear on any publicly accessible map. He also had a reputation. Men with reputations like Julian Ford always required fixers like Simone Davis. "What is the nature of the problem?" she asked. Mr. Ford would prefer to discuss that in person. "Tomorrow evening. The Meridian. Suite 41. The Meridian." Of course. The most exclusive hotel in the city, the kind of place where the concierge remembered your drink order across a decade. Suite 41 occupied the entire top floor. She had been there before, under different circumstances, with a different client who no longer had a problem because she had solved it with the particular elegance she was known for. She pulled up what she already knew about Julian Ford on her encrypted tablet while the voice on the other end waited. He was patient, trained patience, the kind that came with knowing you could afford to be. But Simone recognized training when she encountered it. And she recognized, too, the particular flavor of desperation that hid behind a manufactured calm. "Midnight," she said. "Not before. Mr. Ford will be expecting you." She ended the call without ceremony and sat for a long moment in the city's ambient light, the velvet dark of the office pressing in around the edges of her desk lamp. Her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window was composed, angular, unreadable, a woman built from deliberate choices, each layer of self-possession so carefully constructed that she sometimes forgot there had ever been anything beneath it. She opened a new file and typed a single name. Julian Ford. Then she began to read. Chapter 2, The Ledger. Information is not power. The capacity to weaponize information, that is something else entirely. Simone's research methods were not taught in any university. They had been refined over 11 years of work that existed in the negative space between law and consequence, the gray architecture that kept the city's most powerful people from becoming its most exposed. She was not a lawyer, though she knew the law with a surgeon's precision. She was not an investigator, though she could find the thread inside any secret that, when pulled, unraveled everything. She was a fixer. A closer. The person you called when all other options had been tested and found inadequate. Her associate, a quiet man named Branch who communicated primarily through encrypted documents and a preference for understatement, had Julian Ford's full dossier assembled by 2 in the morning. She read it in her study with a glass of Bordeaux she barely touched. Julian Ford had built his empire on a foundation of legitimate genius and illegitimate advantage. The legitimate part was well documented. His architecture for distributed AI inference had genuinely changed the landscape of enterprise computing. The illegitimate part was what she was here for. 3 items of interest. The first, a licensing agreement signed 7 years ago with a smaller firm called Helix Data Solutions, a company founded by a man named Stephen Williams. The agreement had transferred key intellectual property to Ford Tech under terms that Williams, now deceased, had later claimed were fraudulent. His estate's lawsuit had been settled once and was now reopening, represented by a woman named Jackie Thomas, who had apparently retained someone new. The second, a series of wire transfers routed through 3 shell companies over the past 18 months, totaling approximately $14 million. The destination was not illegal, precisely, but deeply inconvenient, a political action committee whose stated goals were directly, flagrantly in conflict with Julian Ford's very public philanthropic commitments to tech equity and education reform. The third item was quieter. A name. Paula Hicks. Simone read the note twice. Then she closed the file and sat with the city outside her window, letting the information settle into the architecture of what she already knew about men like Julian Ford. Men who controlled everything except the things that could undo them. She poured the Bordeaux down the kitchen sink. She needed clarity, not comfort. She had 21 hours before midnight. Chapter 3, Armor. A woman's preparation is never vanity. It is strategy in its most intimate form. She chose the suit with the same deliberation she applied to contracts. Charcoal. Japanese wool crepe, the kind that moved like water and caught light like obsidian. The cut was architectural, a silhouette that suggested both authority and the particular confidence of a woman who had never needed to raise her voice to be heard. The jacket's single button sat at the exact center of her waist, the lapels narrow and precise. Beneath it, a silk blouse the color of champagne, its collar just visible above the jacket's line. She stood at the mirror and saw what the room would see before it knew anything else about her, a woman who had made deliberate decisions about every visible surface of herself, and who was entirely comfortable with scrutiny. The jewelry was minimal. One piece, a pendant she had worn to every significant negotiation of her career, a small oval of polished onyx set in 22-karat gold. It caught the light when she moved. It was the kind of thing a man's eyes would find without his permission, and she had learned long ago that wherever a man's attention went, his discipline followed. Her perfume was complex, almost argumentative, announcing itself with amber and myrrh, and then complicating everything with something cooler underneath, something that required you to lean in before you understood what you were dealing with. She applied it to the inside of her wrists, the hollow of her throat, and the soft spot behind her right ear. Not excess. Calculation. Her heels were 3 inches, enough to shift her posture into authority without crossing the line into performance. Black. Patent leather. The sound they made on marble floors was its own form of language. She studied her face last. High cheekbones, smooth brown skin, dark eyes that gave nothing away without her explicit permission. Her locks were pinned back tonight, not tightly, but with an ease that suggested they could come down at any moment, that this composed version of herself was chosen rather than fixed. A suggestion, not a limitation. She picked up the slim briefcase, black calfskin, the clasp silent and gold, and stepped into the elevator. A different version of herself was about to go to work. Chapter 4, The Suite. The predator always thinks he has chosen the terrain. He has not considered that his quarry made the map. The Meridian's lobby was the kind of place designed to make you aware of your own smallness, soaring ceilings, the scent of fresh lilies and old money, the hush of a building that understood silence as a luxury. The woman at the front desk recognized Simone with a nod that was exactly professional and led her to a private elevator bank. Suite 41. The doors opened onto an anteroom. Beyond it, through glass panels that looked out over the city in a full 360 panorama, she could see him. Julian Ford was standing at the window with his back to her, a glass of something amber in his hand. He was tall, she had known this from photographs, with the particular ease of posture that came from having been deferred to for so long that the body had absorbed it as natural. He wore a dark suit, no tie, the jacket's collar turned up slightly. A performance of casual authority, the kind of thing men rehearsed without knowing they were rehearsing. The suite was dim, deliberately dim. 2 lamps at their lowest setting, the city providing the rest, a constellation of human ambition spread across the dark. She registered it all without comment, the chess-piece positioning of the furniture, the single chair angled toward the couch where she was presumably meant to sit, the bottle of wine already open on the side table. Vintage Barolo. A guess about her taste or a prop. Either way, she would not be drinking it. She set her briefcase down by the door and walked into the room. Her heels were silent on the carpet. That was the first thing he had not anticipated, that she would be soundless. He registered her presence by some animal signal before he turned, and when he did, she watched his expression do the thing men's expressions always did in the first few seconds, reassess. They always underestimated, and then they recalibrated. The recalibration was always visible if you knew where to look. "Miss Davis," he said. His voice was controlled, deep, practiced, the voice of a man who had given 1,000 presentations and 1,000 more private negotiations. "You found it." "I do not get lost," she said. Not unkindly. Simply. He smiled. It reached his eyes approximately halfway. "Drink." He gestured toward the Barolo. "No, thank you." He studied her for exactly 2 seconds longer than was neutral, and then moved to the couch, not the chair she had been meant to take, and settled into it with the ease of a man on his own territory. She remained standing. The first engagement. She let the silence breathe. Most people filled silence the way they filled fear, immediately, urgently, without thinking about what they were disclosing. Julian Ford was better trained than most. He let it stretch another 4 seconds before he spoke. "I have a situation," he said. "All my clients have situations," Simone replied. She moved to the window, not the seat he had intended for her, and stood with the city at her back. "What kind is yours?" Part 2. The Negotiation. Chapter 5. Proximity. There is a distance inside which a man's logic stops working correctly. Learn it. Use it like a scalpel. He told her about the lawsuit first, or rather, he told her the version of the lawsuit he had decided she needed to know. The Helix Data Solutions matter. Stephen Williams's estate, represented now by Jackie Thomas, who had apparently hired someone new, someone who had found a thread he had not previously known existed. Simone listened without expression and watched his hands. A man's hands told you the things his face had been trained to conceal. Julian Ford's hands were precise, controlled, but as he spoke about Jackie Thomas's new attorney, his left thumb made a small, repetitive motion against his glass that he was entirely unaware of. He was afraid. Not of the lawsuit itself. He had survived lawsuits before. He had the resources to weather most things. He was afraid of something specific inside the lawsuit. Something the new attorney had found, or was close to finding. She let him finish. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "I need the matter resolved." "Define resolved." He set his glass down. It made no sound. He had the careful habits of a man who had learned to control his impact on every surface he touched, except the ones he did not know were watching him. "The estate's attorney has been in contact with someone inside my organization," he said. "I need to know who. And I need the discovery process to stop producing documents it should not be producing." "You want me to locate a leak inside your company and find a way to contain a legal process," Simone said. She kept her voice neutral, the way you kept a blade neutral before you decided where to place it. "That is two separate problems." "I know. That is why I am paying for the best." He said it the way men said things they believed would land like flattery. She received it the way she received most flattery, as information about the person delivering it rather than about herself. She crossed the room slowly, unhurried, moving to the side table near the window. Not to the wine. She simply repositioned, closer to him now, not dramatically, just enough to change the gravitational field of the conversation. She could feel the shift in his attention before she saw it. The way his posture made a small, involuntary adjustment. Men like Julian Ford believed they were immune to the body's basic mathematics. They believed their discipline was comprehensive. It never was. "My fee," she said, turning slightly to face him, "for both problems is 400,000. Half before I begin, half on resolution. I do not negotiate the number, and I do not take meetings after midnight twice." The last sentence was not a complaint. It was a marker, a precise signal that she was aware of the intention behind the late hour, and that she found it neither threatening nor flattering. Simply noted. His jaw tightened fractionally. Then, done. Too fast. She had expected him to push back, to use the negotiation as an excuse to extend the meeting, to keep her in the room. The speed of his agreement told her something. He wanted her cooperation on something more than this. Chapter 6. The Second Agenda. Nobody hires a surgeon to make conversation. When a man overpays, he is buying something he has not said yet. He refilled his glass. She watched him decide, watched the calculation move behind his eyes like weather before a system breaks. "There is another matter," he said. "There always is." He stood. This was deliberate, returning height to the conversation, reasserting the three-dimensional authority his seated posture had conceded. He moved toward the window, and now they were closer, the city burning behind the glass between them. "Paula Hicks," he said. He was watching for her response. She gave him nothing. "You know the name?" "I know a lot of names," she said. He studied her face for the tell that was not there. "She is a former employee. Compliance officer. She left the company 8 months ago under mutually agreed circumstances. Meaning you let her go and she signed an NDA she may now be reconsidering." The half-second of stillness before he answered was loud. "She has been seen with Jackie Thomas's attorney. A man named Dean Harrison." Simone moved, not away from him, but toward the desk at the suite's far side, where she set her hands flat on the surface and turned to face him across the room. The distance was tactical. She wanted him tracking her, not settling into comfort. If Paula Hicks is speaking to opposing counsel, an NDA becomes considerably more complicated, she said. "Whatever she knows, does it connect to the Helix matter directly, or is it adjacent?" He walked toward her. The move was almost theatrical, the tech mogul crossing his dim high-rise suite at midnight to close the distance with the woman he had summoned here. She let him close half of it. Then she moved, slightly, just enough that he had to recalculate. Not retreat. Redistribution. "Adjacent," he said. His voice had dropped. But in this context, adjacent might as well be identical. "Tell me what she knows." His eyes moved across her face, as if reading for something. She watched him decide, and this time the decision was different. He had reached the part of the evening he had planned most carefully. "She knows about the transfers," he said. "The ones through the Political Action Committee. She flagged them internally. I had the report buried. She knows the report exists, and she knows I buried it." Simone said nothing for 3 seconds. The city hummed outside the glass. The lamplight threw him in half-shadow, And she could see the architecture of what he was hiding, not in his face, where he had been too careful, but in the way his shoulders held. The tension of a man who had been carrying a specific weight for a long time and had not yet found a surface strong enough to set it down on. So your compliance officer flagged potentially illegal campaign contributions, you suppressed her findings, she left the company, and she is now talking to the attorney representing the estate of the man whose IP you may have fraudulently acquired, Simone said. She let each clause land like a stone in still water. Julian. This is not a situation. This is a structure. He did not answer. Which was its own answer. You did not call me to fix a leak, she continued. You called me because you need the entire building inspected before it collapses on itself. And you needed to see if I would run when I understood what I was actually looking at. He was close now. Too close by standard professional geometry, though she had expected this, had calculated for it. His presence was substantial, the kind of presence that moved other people without requiring them to be touched. Are you running? He asked. She held his gaze. It was dark and searching, and underneath the manufactured composure she could read the actual question, the one that cost him something to be asking. Can I trust you with the version of myself I have been hiding? I do not run, she said. I negotiate. And what I am about to negotiate is considerably more expensive than $400,000. Chapter 7. The Reveal. The moment a powerful man realizes you know his secret is not the moment he becomes afraid. It is the moment he becomes honest. She let him absorb it. Then she opened her briefcase. The file she laid on the desk was thin, 12 pages, printed on plain white paper, carrying the weight of a city. She turned it to face him and stepped back. He looked at it. His hand moved toward it, stopped. Where did you? That is not the right question. He looked up at her. For the first time that evening, the architecture of his control developed a visible crack. Not collapse, Julian Ford was too disciplined for collapse. But fracture. The file contained the shell company structure. The complete routing of the $14 million. The buried compliance report, recovered in its original form. And behind it, a sworn statement. Paula Hicks in her own hand. He picked it up. Read it. His face went through 4 distinct expressions in 6 seconds, and she catalogued each one without sentiment, recognition, calculation, anger, and finally, the one she had been waiting for, understanding. He set the pages down. How long have you had this? He asked. His voice was different now. Quieter. More real. Long enough. You came in here already holding. I do not take meetings without doing my homework, Julian. The use of his first name was calculated. Not to diminish, she was not interested in diminishment. Diminishment was the tool of people who needed others to be small. She needed him to be exactly the size he was, so she could negotiate with the whole of him. He walked to the window. Stood with his back to her again, the posture he had opened the evening with, but it was different now. The first time, it had been a performance of ease. Now it was something closer to a man trying to find his footing. She waited. What do you want? He finally asked. The question was stripped of the evening's earlier veneer. It was direct. Exhausted. Almost human. The same thing I always want, Simone said. A clear understanding of the terms. She picked up the file and held it. You have 3 problems. The Helix lawsuit, the campaign finance exposure, and Paula Hicks. I can manage all 3. But the terms change significantly when a client is not honest with me about the full scope of what they need. You brought me in here thinking you would control the narrative. That I would see the room, the wine, the view, and adjust my price accordingly. She set the file back down. You did not account for the possibility that I had already read the room before I walked into it. He turned. And for a moment, just a moment, she saw him. Not Julian Ford, the constructed entity whose name came with its own gravitational field. Just a man, in a dim room, looking at a woman who had walked into his carefully staged trap carrying better intelligence than he had. The look on his face was not humiliation. It was something more complicated. Something that lived in the space between admiration and vulnerability. You are extraordinary, he said. It came out differently than she expected, not flattery, not strategy. Something unguarded. I am effective, she replied. There is a distinction. Part 3. The Shift. Chapter 8. The Physics of a Room. Tension, when it is honest, is its own form of intelligence. The body knows things before the mind gives it permission. The negotiation resumed. Not the financial negotiation, they had passed through that door and come out the other side. This was something else, the negotiation of terms between 2 people who had entered the room as adversaries and found themselves in unfamiliar territory. She named her actual fee. He accepted it without haggling, which was its own form of acknowledgement. He poured himself a second glass of the Barolo. She accepted water from the bar cart still, room temperature, and held the glass the way she held everything, without excess. They sat. Not as she had anticipated, she on the prepared couch, he in the dominant chair, but across from each other at the suite's low table, the file between them, the city performing its indifferent theater beyond the glass. Tell me about Paula, she said. It is not what you are thinking. I rarely think in categories, Simone said. Tell me what it actually is. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a plane moved across the dark, its lights blinking their patient Morse. When he spoke again, the voice was different, not the boardroom register, not the calculated intimacy he had used earlier. Something underneath both of those. She was the best compliance officer I had ever hired. Rigorous. Unafraid of me. Do you know how rare that is, someone in that role who is genuinely unafraid of the person running the company? Simone knew. She knew what it cost to be unafraid of power. She had built her entire career on it. She found the transfers in month 3. Brought them to me directly. No memo trail, no escalation. She came to my office at 7 in the morning and laid it on my desk and told me we had a problem. And you told her to bury it. I told her I would handle it. Same thing. He looked at her steadily. For the first time, she had the sense that she was seeing him in something close to true light. Yes, he said. Same thing. The admission sat between them. It was the kind of admission that cost something real, not legal exposure, not strategic ground, but the harder currency of self-knowledge offered to another person. She did not diminish it. Why did she leave? She asked. Because she knew I would never let her put it right. She was too good at her job to stay somewhere the job could not be done honestly. Simone absorbed this. Filed it. Then she said, if we are going to fix this, and by fix I mean actually fix it, not just reduce your exposure, you are going to have to let me see everything. The full structure of the Helix acquisition. The complete record of the transfers. Whatever else Paula Hicks knows about and has not used yet. And what do you do with everything? I find the shape of the problem. And then I find the shape of the solution that does not leave you in a worse position in 18 months than you are in now. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his glass held between his hands. He was close. She was entirely aware of it in the specific, cataloged way she was aware of all things: distance, angle, temperature, the particular quality of the light on his face, the line of his jaw. The information did not move her from her position. But she registered it. Honestly. Most people who come in here trying to handle me, he said quietly, are afraid of me. Or they want something from me. Or both. You are neither. Wanting your money is different from wanting something from you, she said. I want your money. That is clean. It does not complicate anything. And the rest of it? Everything else in this room. She held his gaze. The air between them had acquired a density that was not quite tension, but was adjacent to it, the particular atmosphere of two people who have been honest with each other across a difficult hour and found themselves, unexpectedly, in the same country. The rest of it, she said, is not part of the contract. Chapter 9. The Silk Tie. There is a moment in every room when the architecture changes and neither person has moved. That moment is the actual negotiation. She stood to collect the file. He stood too. There was no calculation in it, at least, not the kind he had employed for the earlier part of the evening. This was something more basic. Something that moved the body before the mind had finished its argument. They were very close. She was putting the documents in order, her hands precise and unhurried, and he was watching her in the way he had stopped watching her for most of the evening, not as a variable in a strategic calculation, but as a person. As a woman, specifically, which she was entirely, deliberately, without apology, when it served her, which it did at this moment in a way she could not have precisely scripted, but had certainly not failed to anticipate. His tie was silk. Italian. A deep burgundy that she had noticed when she walked in, the kind of detail her eye gathered automatically. She set the last page into the briefcase and turned, and her hand passing over the desk's surface in the motion of gathering her things, brushed the silk tail of his tie. Not an accident. Not an overture either. Something between those two things. A fingertip trailing over 2 inches of fabric, the briefest contact, and then gone. He went very still. The stillness of a man who had been touched in the place where his control was thinnest. Simone, he said. Just her name. No agenda in it, which was the most disarming thing he had said all evening. The contract will be delivered to your attorney by 9 a.m. I will need access to your compliance records by end of week. I heard you. Good. She picked up her briefcase. She walked to the door of the suite in the unhurried way she walked everywhere, her heels silent on the thick carpet. At the door, she paused. She turned just enough to see him from the corner of her eye. He was standing exactly where she had left him, at the desk, his hand resting near where hers had been. Julian. Yes. The next time we meet will be professional. Whatever else is happening in this room, and I am not pretending it is not happening, that stays here. A pause. That is a rule. That is a boundary, she said. There is a distinction. She heard him exhale, something between a laugh and a concession. Yes, he said. It is. She let herself out. The elevator descended without ceremony, returning her to the lobby's marble light, the scent of lilies, the professional nighttime hum of the city's best address. She stepped outside. The air was cold and honest. She did not look up at the 41st floor. She did not need to. Chapter 10. The Morning Architecture. What you do with the night is your own business. What you do with the morning is your character. At 5:43 a.m., Simone was at her desk with her second coffee and the full Helix Data Solutions acquisition file, which Branch had sourced through channels she did not ask him to name. The truth of it was considerably more complicated than Julian had described. More complicated and more actionable, which was the part she suspected he had not fully anticipated when he agreed to give her access. Stephen Williams had not simply been a smaller operator outmaneuvered by a larger one. He had been a genuine innovator, a 51-year-old black engineer from Houston who had built Helix from a basement lab and 3 employees into a company with 17 patents, a DoD contract, and a proprietary inference algorithm that Ford Tech now used as the backbone of its enterprise product. The transfer of that algorithm had been structured through an acquisition agreement that contained what Simone recognized, even without a law degree, as a material misrepresentation in Section 7.3. The clause asserted that Helix had no existing licensing agreements with third parties at the time of sale. Helix had, in fact, had a provisional agreement with a university research consortium that Ford Tech's due diligence team had found and buried in its notes without disclosing to Williams. Williams had signed without knowing what he was giving away. For months later, Ford Tech had licensed the algorithm to the DoD at a contract value of $240 million. Stephen Williams had died of a stroke 18 months after the sale. His daughter, a woman named Rachel Williams, now lived in Atlanta and was a named party in the estate suit. Simone set down her coffee. She had taken this engagement because it was complex, because it paid, and because, if she was being entirely honest with herself, she had wanted to see whether Julian Ford was as formidable as his reputation suggested. She had her answer on that count. What she had not fully anticipated was the answer to a different question, whether the work, in this particular instance, could be done cleanly. Whether a resolution existed that served her client without further eroding the foundation that Stephen Williams's daughter was standing on. She pulled up a new document and began to type. Not the contract, that was already drafted. This was something else. A memo to herself, which she called, in her private filing system, a ledger. Every engagement had a ledger. A running account of what things actually cost, not in fees, but in the currency of consequence. Who bore what weight? Who was made smaller by the resolution and who was made larger? She wrote Julian Ford's name at the top. And then, below it, she wrote Rachel Williams. She stared at the two names for a long time. Then she began to write what a real solution might look like. Part 4. The Cost of the Clean Answer. Chapter 11. Paula. The most important conversations happen between two women who have both survived the same kind of ruin. She found Paula Hicks at a coffee shop in Harlem on a Thursday morning, which was not an accident. Simone had spent 2 days arranging for the encounter to appear accidental. Paula was 38 slight, with natural hair cut close and a face that carried its history without trying to hide it. She had the look of a woman who had been through something significant and had come out the other side not unmarked but intact. She was reading something on her phone when Simone sat across from her. Paula looked up. Registered Simone. Registered that this was not coincidence. Set her phone down. He sent you, she said. Not a question. Not afraid. He hired me, Simone said. That is different. Is it? It means I make my own decisions about what gets done. Which is why I am talking to you directly, here, rather than working around you. Paula regarded her. The kind of regard that took the full measure of a person before committing to a response. What do you want from me? I want to understand what you are trying to do. Not what Julian thinks you are doing, what you are actually doing. Paula wrapped both hands around her mug. The gesture was not weakness, but steadiness, the action of a person who had learned to hold things carefully. I am trying to make sure Rachel Williams gets what her father built. Simone said nothing. Let the statement exist. I was there, Paula continued. In the compliance department when the acquisition went through. I saw the due diligence notes. I saw what they found about the university agreement, and I saw how it got handled. And then I watched Stephen Williams die never knowing the company he gave everything to build was the foundation of a $240 million federal contract. Her voice was even. The evenness of a woman who had practiced this, who had held this particular grief and fury long enough that it had been refined into precision. I signed the NDA because I needed the severance, she said. I have a son at Howard. I made a practical decision. But practical decisions have a weight, and I have been carrying it for 8 months. When Dean Harrison reached out and told me what Rachel Williams was trying to do, I decided the weight was not worth what I was getting for carrying it. Simone looked at her for a long moment. An NDA signed under conditions of fraudulent concealment is potentially voidable, Simone said. That is not a promise, it is a legal posture. But it is a posture that exists. Paula's eyes sharpened. She was smart. Of course she was. Julian Ford had hired her, and for all his flaws, he did not hire people who were not smart. Julian does not know you are here. No. What are you doing? Simone considered how to answer. She considered the ledger. She considered what it meant to solve a problem cleanly versus solving it in a way that simply transferred the damage to someone less visible. I am looking for the answer that actually works, she said. For everyone. Julian included? Julian included. Because a solution that ignores him does not hold, and you know that. Paula studied her. The coffee shop hummed around them, conversations, the milk steamer, a child at a table near the window demanding something from her father with the complete righteousness of someone who had never been told no. What would that solution look like? Paula asked. I do not know yet, Simone said honestly. But I am working on it. And I need you to give me some time before you give Dean Harrison anything further. How much time? 3 weeks. Paula looked at her. Then she picked up her mug and drank. 2. Simone nodded. It was the answer she would have given herself. Chapter 12. The Ledger Revised. Power corrects itself when it is confronted with the full cost of its own decisions. The trick is being the person in the room who can make it face that number. She went back to Julian. Not at midnight. Not in a high-rise suite with a city performing behind glass. She requested a meeting at his office, a conference room, 9 a.m., professional light. She arrived with the contract, the compliance file analysis, and a second document she placed on the table before he had time to settle into his side of the room. What is this? He asked. A proposal, she said. Separate from our contracted work. He sat. He read. The document outlined a restructuring of the Helix matter, not a legal capitulation, not a settlement that would expose him to further claims, but a negotiated acknowledgement of the Section 7.3 misrepresentation, accompanied by a voluntary compensation structure for Stephen Williams's estate. Something Ford Teca's communications team could frame as integrity. Something Rachel Williams would actually feel. The campaign finance matter, separately, could be addressed through a self-reported amendment and a redirected philanthropic contribution of equivalent value to the tech education initiatives he had publicly championed. Painful. Not fatal. He read the whole thing twice. She waited. This is more expensive than the problem. In the short term, she said. In the long term, this is the only version of the future where Ford Teca's infrastructure licensing business does not become a liability. Because Dean Harrison is very good, Julian, and what he is building is going to find the Section 7.3 problem with or without Paula. And when it finds it in a courtroom rather than in a conference room, it will not look like integrity. It will look like everything else it actually is. He was looking at her. You talked to Paula. I talked to everyone relevant to the problem. I hired you to contain the problem. You hired me to fix it. There is a distinction. His jaw moved. She watched him arrive at the edge of the anger and then, she had not been entirely certain he would do this. Step back from it. Make the harder choice. The compensation to the Williams estate, he said slowly. What number are you proposing? That, she said, is what we are going to negotiate this morning. With both our lawyers present. And Rachel Williams' attorney on a conference line. He stared at her. You already set it up. I prepared the option. You can decline it. He looked at the document. At the city outside his office window, different light than the sweet, morning light, the kind that made everything visible. How do you know this is the right thing to do? He asked. And it was a genuine question. The kind a person asked when they were actually uncertain. Because I kept a ledger, she said. On every problem in this case. And when I added the columns, this was the only answer that balanced. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached for his phone and called his attorney. Part 5. What remains in the room? Chapter 13. Resolution. The cleanest solution is always the one that does not require you to look away from what you did to achieve it. 6 weeks later, Ford Tech announced a voluntary post-acquisition equity correction for the Helix Data Solutions estate. The press release framed it as a commitment to the founding principle that innovation, wherever it originated, deserved recognition. It was written by a communications firm Simone had quietly recommended. Rachel Williams, reached by a reporter from a tech industry publication, declined to comment beyond a single sentence she had approved in advance. My father's work is finally being called what it was. Dean Harrison called Simone 2 days after the announcement. I do not know how you did it, he said. You would not need to, she replied. Your client got what she needed. And your client? My client is still standing. Which is what he paid for. A pause on the line. You are very good, Harrison said. I know. Paula Hicks enrolled in a law program in the fall. Simone learned this from Branch's periodic updates and filed it in the ledger under the column she privately labeled, Consequential Outcomes. The campaign finance amendment was processed by the FEC without public event. The redirected philanthropic contribution funded 3 HBCU engineering fellowships. One of the first recipients was a 20-year-old from Houston named Marcus Williams, Stephen Williams's nephew, a fact Simone had discovered in week 2 and had not shared with Julian, because some things were for the ledger and not for the negotiation. Chapter 14. The Second Midnight. What you choose to do after the work is done, that is not the contract. That is you. He called her. Not through an intermediary. Not on the encrypted line. Her personal number, which she had not given him, but which he had, she noted, apparently been able to acquire. That was either impressive or concerning, and she decided to consider it both. Simone. Julian. A pause. The quality of a pause was information. I would like to have dinner. The contract is closed. I know. Then the professional engagement is over. I know that too, he said. I am asking about something that is not the contract. She was at her desk. The city outside was early evening, that hour when the light goes gold and complicated, when the day tips into the part of itself that is less about accomplishment and more about simply being in it. She looked at the window. At her own reflection in it, composed and deliberate and wearing, she noticed, the expression she kept for things she had not fully decided yet. You understand that I know everything about you, she said, including the parts that you are not proud of. I am aware. And you understand that is not a liability to me. It is just information. That is not particularly romantic, he said. No, she agreed. It is honest. Which I find more reliable. Another pause. She could hear the quality of his thinking in it, the man she had watched build a position across an evening and then, when the position failed, find his footing anyway. I have been thinking about what you said. About the ledger. The part about the only answer being the one where all the columns balance. I have been applying it to things that are not work. She absorbed this. Filed it. Did not dismiss it. Dinner, she said finally. Yes. One condition. I choose the place. Naturally. And Julian. Yes. I already know where you are going to sit. You are going to try to take the chair with its back to the wall. A long pause. Then, and she recognized it, the genuine laugh of a man genuinely caught. How did you? I know how you move in rooms, she said. I am going to take that chair first. He laughed again. It was a better laugh than anything he had produced in the suite at midnight, unguarded, real, the laugh of a person who had just been seen in a way that did not require them to be smaller. Of course you are, he said. Epilogue, the velvet ledger. Power is not the same thing as control. Control is what you exert. Power is what you have when you no longer need to. The restaurant she chose was not in a high-rise. It was a corner place in Harlem, warmly lit, unhurried, the kind of establishment where the food was serious and the noise level allowed conversation, and the staff had been there long enough to know the difference between a first date and a negotiation. She arrived first. She took the chair with its back to the wall. He arrived 7 minutes later and stood at the entrance to the dining room for a moment, reading the room the way he read everything, for exits, for power dynamics, for the position of the person he was there to see. She watched him find her and register the chair. Watched something move across his face that was, she thought, close to delight. He sat down across from her. The candle between them made its uncomplicated light. You really did take it, he said. I said I would. I know. I am starting to understand that you mean the things you say. That should not be an exceptional quality in a person, she said. No, he agreed. It should not. The waiter came. They ordered. When he left, there was a moment of the quiet that had lived in the suite at midnight, the same quality, the same density, but here it was different. Here, neither of them had an agenda. Here, the only thing in the room was the room. Tell me something, Julian said, that is not in any file. She looked at him across the candle. At the man who had tried to own the room and been surprised to find it already occupied. Who had been afraid and then honest and then, slowly, at real cost to himself, correct. I grew up in a house where being quiet meant you were safe, she said. I spent a long time learning how to make quiet something I chose rather than something I survived. He listened. The good kind of listening, not gathering information, not waiting for his turn. Just present. And now, he asked. Now I choose everything, she said. Including this. She meant the dinner. She meant the chair. She meant the particular quality of the decision she had made when she picked up the phone and said yes to the one meeting that was not professional. She meant all of it. And he understood all of it. The city moved beyond the restaurant's windows, its infinite negotiation, its relentless ledger of ambition and consequence, the endless exchange of power and cost, and the rare, clean transaction of one person being honest with another. Simone Davis picked up her menu. She had made her choice. The end. Hood Eloquence, where the streets meet the literature.